Awesome, isn't it? So, the important fact is the fact that is inalienably the case. But the only thing that matters is what is happening. What is actually, it's not something you need to do or you need to not do, or you can do or you cannot do. That's irrelevant. What matters is what is already spontaneously the case. This morning we've been modeling it as the presence of your experiential field, but just this actuality that's here, you can't start it, you can't stop it, you can't make it more actual, you can't make it less actual. It's just here, and this fact, this condition, is the important fact. It's the important condition. In fact, it's the only fact. It's the only condition, and it is, of course, supremely powerful, supremely potent, supremely grand, supremely everything, or nothing, if you want. So, that being the case, what you do or don't do, or what your spin doctoring yourself is doing or not doing within this context is completely irrelevant. So you have a free hand. Have at it. Go nuts. Knock yourself out. Because nothing you can do impacts this condition, impacts this fact. This actuality does not become more or less what it is, depending on what seems to be happening within it. So, which is kind of, it's nice in one sense, in the sense of an open-ended invitation to freedom, and it's nice in a more primal sense of that this is not delicate. It's not vulnerable. It doesn't need to be maintained. It doesn't need to be preserved. It doesn't need to be protected. You could not impact this or damage this if you wanted to. I mean, humans set off atom bombs and do genocide and all that, and it doesn't budge the actuality of this presence. It does not impact it completely. It's like a dream. You can dream anything you want, but the dreaming is just dreaming. It's not impacted by what's there. You can dream about forest fires, but the dream isn't burnt. You can dream about great glories or horrible grotesqueries, and the dream is not tainted or improved. It's just this absolute purity of presence, the absolute purity of what this is completely invulnerable. It's completely independent of anything and everything. So it's kind of cool. Now, this morning we sort of were playing with and dancing with what might be called the theoretical aspects of all this. I call this a yoga of radiant presence. And yoga is a technical term coming from India, which basically means engagement of discovery, engagement of integration, engagement of opening to and entering into and integrating with, or something along those lines, reality, self-realization, realizing truth, realizing God, all of these, which are all basically euphemisms for the same thing, which is actuality, coming to discover what actuality is. And of course, paradoxically, there's nothing but actuality. There never has been. So it's less a matter of coming to discover that than coming to recognize what is already the case, what has always been the case, and what can't not be the case. This that is here is available for discovery because it is here and it's not hidden. There's nothing blocking it. And it's not even camouflaged. It's very weird and slippery. If it's hidden by anything, it's hidden by its astoundingly bizarre nature, its multidimensionality, its unresolvability, all of these, its infinity, all of these intrinsic qualities make it seemingly slippery from within the human perspective. But of course, the human perspective isn't necessary, because this is not human. What's here is not human, and you are not human, because you are this that is here. Now, of course, we're all very familiar with thinking of ourselves and feeling like we reside within the human perspective. But the human perspective is a subset that we hold in our imagination, that we hold in our, sort of a mental perspective or worldview or unconscious, whatever, of an interpretation of what is going on here and what we are. It's like a template we sort of have in the back of our imagination. But of course, this is not limited by that template, and the template is not necessary for what this is. And in fact, your engagement with this has nothing to do with the template. You don't experience light because you think you're a human. You experience light because it's miraculously present in the field of your experience, so on and so forth. All of these qualities that show up are just here, and they don't require any, there's no prerequisite. There's no, you have to hold it as being this, or it won't be available. On the contrary, you can't make it go away. You can't shut it off. So all of this information, which I sort of sum up as being radiance, all these incredible flavors of experiential characteristics, what we think of, what we call light, sound, thought, sensation. I mean, just subtle vibes, emotion, just whatever, just all of these flavors of, experiential qualities, experiential stuff, is here. It's just here spontaneously, and you can't make it more here. You can't make it less here. You can't make it start. You can't make it stop. You can't make it dirty. You can't make it clean. It's just what it is. And noticing that fact is very powerful and transformative. Simply noticing that fact, because it's not something that we don't know. We all know this intrinsically and basically. It's been our starting point. I mean, when you were born, that's all you had. And, we've all been through a very systematic brainwashing and education of, this is a floor, this is a rug, this is a woman, this is a man, this is light, this is a body, you're Peter Brown, you're you, this, that, So all of this sort of elaborate gamesmanship we've learned of naming things and designating things, and as kids we regurgitate and we get all these strokes and rewards for regurgitating it, your mom and dad are so happy when you say mama. I say mama, oh, he said mama, oh, that's so great. It's like you're a trained monkey. You learn to regurgitate a sound, and you get all these strokes. And of course, that feels great. It's great. Wow, great. I said, mama, mama, mama. And basically, the entire human perspective seeds itself like a virus socially into children through this, this natural process of education, of indoctrination into the human worldview. But it's not our native condition. The native condition, when you were born, you didn't know you were a person. You didn't know this was a world. It was just, wow, just this, boom, everything's on 10 and wow. But of course, the education has been prolonged and heavily reinforced, and everyone around seems to be playing the same game. So, what do you mean? I'm a male, I'm a man, I'm a human being. This is the world. I mean, so all of this stuff that is just basically arbitrary gamesmanship that we're brainwashed in, it becomes kind of accepted as objective, as opposed to just an arbitrary thing. It's like the rules of Monopoly. This player is me. That piece is you. This is boardwalk. This is go. And so you learn these rules, and then that seems to be objectively true, even though it's completely arbitrary. So at any rate, we've all been indoctrinated into this human perspective, but it's artificial. It's an add-on. And the original condition never went anywhere. The original infantile perspective of just, whoa, just here this is. It never went anywhere. Here it is. It's no more or less here than it was when you were, born 5 minutes ago. we just have been very skilled at developing all of these, elaborate game techniques of designation and response, call and response to stimuli and all this stuff, playing the human game, which is fine. There's no problem. And nothing, it doesn't hurt anything, except if you, get suckered into thinking that's all there is, then you get suckered into buying the implications of all of that, which turns out, the problem in spirituality. The only problem in spirituality is misidentifying reality. Because when we misidentify it, we diminish it, we minimize it, we make it smaller, we make it less vital, we make it less magical, we make it less miraculous, and we end up living these lives where we're trying to fight for money and fight for success and fight for this and fight for health and happiness, and we're going to fail because we're all going to get sick and die, and you aren't happy all the time, and I mean, oh my God, it really sucks, and so you're just sort of playing a losing game. And so the human perspective is intrinsically problematic, but it's completely imaginary. So thinking that you're suffering under the weight of all these problems is a self-created situation that exists in one's imagination, in actual fact. And so when you discover this, I should say recognize or remember or notice that, wow, wait a minute, all of that is only one very partial interpretation of what's going on here. When you look at what's really going on here, you discover it doesn't conform to any of that at all. Intrinsically, it doesn't conform to any of that at all necessarily. It's just miraculously present, infinite field of astounding spontaneous energy, which is instantaneous and infinite and unresolvable, and does itself, and is beyond space and time. Space and time appears within it, and there are theories that apply to it or imposed upon it. It itself is not spatial, it's omnipresent. Everything happens in your field of experience. Your field of experience is here, right? When you see the clouds in the sky, where do you see them? You see them here in your field of experience. When you see the sun, where do you see it? You see it here in your field of experience. So here is just a name for you, for your presence, for the presence of your experience. When you see distant galaxies, where do you see them? Here. So where is space? Here. Galaxies are here. The sun is here. Microbes are here. The entire human race, which as far as I can tell experientially consists of you all at the moment, is here. So on and so forth. At any rate, the point is that the condition that this actually consists of, that it explicitly is available and is recognizable in its own terms, and the implications of what that is and the way that is has a lot of real nice perks, especially by contrast to the implications of what the normal human worldview of the human scenario is, which is pretty grim by most reckonings. By my reckoning, okay. All right. So again, that's sort of more theory, but I call this a yoga. So in my terminology, this is radiant presence. It is a presence. It is undeniably present. Regardless, don't worry about trying to analyze what that means. What do you mean by present? It's like, who cares? This is present, and it is self-verifying. So whatever you mean by that, you can't ever find or resolve ultimately what that means. And yet you can just say, yeah, like no shit, Sherlock, this is present, this is. And it is radiant. It continually, unstoppably, spontaneously presents as all this barrage of experiential characteristics, right? Just information, whatever, however you characterize it or classify it or not. It's all, continually showing up right here. So that's radiant presence. Now, the yoga of radiant presence is noticing that fact, noticing the undeniable actuality of this fact, and in that simple noticing, in that simple recognition, it communicates immediately and directly its nature and its implications, its flavor, if you will. The fact that it is, your experience is this, boundless bubble floating in nothingness that all of reality appears in. I mean, here you are, here's the bubble of your experience. What's it sitting on? What's it sitting in? What's holding it up? It's just here. And everything shows up in it and, comes and, appears and disappears and so on. But this bubble is just here, floating in nothing. It's a given. It's not, you can't make it more here or less here. You can't turn it on or off. It's just here. And everything, all of reality appears within this, all this informational content appears and disappears. You go to sleep, the world disappears, your body disappears, your history disappears. You start dreaming, there's a new world, a new body, a new history, whatever. I mean, who knows, right? And then you wake up and seemingly it's, the body reappears, but it's not quite the same because in actual fact, you never experience your body exactly the same. It always feels slightly different. It looks slightly different. Everything is always slightly different. So there's always this unique presentation of information, unique patternings of characteristics present in experience. It never repeats. It's always unique. It's always spontaneous. It's always surprising and unexpected. You cannot know exactly what your experience is going to be in the next instant. You cannot know exactly what your eyes are going to light on. You cannot know exactly what thought or mood is going to appear in your mind, right? It's always this amazing, surprising, spontaneous light show of just all of these flavors just continually showing up. And so you can feel that. I mean, so the yoga is very simple. Feel this. Feel this presence. Feel this radiance. Feel this characteristics. Just feel what it feels like. Feel how it is doing itself. I mean, here it is. Okay. Do you need to? Are you putting your experience here? Do you have to put it here? Or are you like churning it out? Like, let me make some experience happen. Right? It's just effortlessly, completely spontaneously. Everything appears right now, right here. Right? Feel that. Feel what that feels like. I mean, you're always feeling it. It's a no-brainer. It's nothing new, right? It's like duh. But when you just feel that itself, it's quite palpable. It's completely obvious. It's not obscure. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to analyze it. I mean, you can. I mean, you can play you can play endless mind games with this stuff. It's totally fun. But this is not a thought, right? This is not a theory. This is not an imagination. This that is here is actual, and it is palpably actual. And of course, it's its own kind of. When I say palpably, it's its own. How do you feel experience? Well, you can't answer that question. How is experience perceived? How does sentience or consciousness or whatever experience light? How do you feel light? I don't know, but you can't not. You can't stop it. And you can feel it. It has a texture. Light has a texture. You feel what light feels like. You can tell you're seeing because you feel the texture of light. We all do it completely intuitively and obviously. You can tell light from sound because it has a different texture, right? There's always sound present. There's always light present. And if you look very closely, light is a kind of a mysterious, present little sparkling or dancing or zinging or something. I mean, I can't say what it is, but there's a dynamism there. There's a kind of a liveliness there that's very real-time, very present. Sound, the same thing. It isn't the sound. It's this real-time, buzzing or something. Feel sensation, it's like, okay, my butt's on the chair. And if you don't think about it, it's just, well, it's just the chair's just sitting there. It's not moving and my butt's sitting there and it's just sort of being felt constantly. But if you really notice, how do you feel the chair under your butt? What's it feel like? And if you feel carefully, you'll notice it's just this tingling, vibrating, pulsating, sparkling kind of I mean, you can't say what it is, but it's this dancing energy presence that has it's a palpably different texture than the energy presence of light, right, in consciousness. I mean, do you feel that? It has a palpably different energy texture than sound, and yet it's all basically the same energy. It's instantaneous sort of liveliness, I mean, sparklingness or tingling. You can sort of have all kinds of euphemisms or, sort of ways to try to capture it. But in actuality, you don't need that, because it itself, you don't need to have a model of it. You don't need to approach it through models or ideas. It itself is completely palpable, and it shows what it is. You can know what light is very directly and with astounding intimacy, non-conceptually, just by experiencing light. And of course, you do every second of your life, right? And the same with all of this energy, all this radiance that seems to show up in all these various dimensions of bandwidth and texture and so on. Thought. I mean, thought's always, there's always present thought. You may be sort of thinking or not thinking in some kind of heavy-handed terms, but there's always a sort of liveliness and energy in the bandwidth that we think of as mentalities, and then there's other bandwidths we don't even have classification for, right? I mean, we have sort of, the five senses, vision, touch, sound, smell, taste, and then thought's kind of another bandwidth. It's another sense field in a way. But there's all sorts of other stuff that humans just don't even have a name for it. Just little weird vibes and, moods and little zings. But there's all kinds of content in all of this, bandwidth. That's all essentially the same thing, although of an infinite range of different textures, but it's all the same real-time sort of liveliness, real-time sort of tingling or something. I don't know what. I mean, obviously, it doesn't resolve. You can't say what it is. But it doesn't need to resolve to see what it is, to see its unresolvability. Its unresolvability is quite palpable. I mean, here's light, exactly what is light. The exactly what it is kind of a non-exactness, but it's a very specific and actual non-exactness, right? That light, that you can't pin light down, is very explicit and palpable. It's not an abstraction that you can't pin it down. It's a very obvious, concrete fact. You can't pin it down. The same with sound. It's like, what exactly is sound? Well, this is sound, check it out. Well, there's sound, sound, all right. And it's there, it's kind of mundane and obvious. It's just sound, like always. But then, what is it exactly that's there? When you're hearing sound, what is it that's present? What is that sort of liveliness? And it's interesting, you can't answer that question. You can't find it and okay, yeah, no, exactly what sound is. Sound is exactly, this, that, and the other. It's transcendental. It transcends analysis. It transcends resolution, resolving it as being precisely, exactly a certain way. And yet it is precisely a certain way. Sound is very specifically sound, but it's unresolvable. It's infinite. It's this astounding, miraculous presence that is exactly what it is, and yet isn't anything in particular. I mean, you can't find it. You can't lose it, but you can't find it. Light, you can't lose it. I mean, here it is, right? Constantly, always light. You can't find it though. It's like you try and pin down exactly what light is. I don't mean theoretically in physics or something. You're experiencing light right now. Exactly what is that experience? What is it that you experience when you experience light? And it's very fine, isn't it? It's very detailed, you might say, right? It's very, it's clearly kind of luminous, whatever that means, obviously. But it doesn't. It's not like it comes together into some simplicity, into some coherence, into some wholeness, where you can find it and say, okay, now I know exactly what light is. You can know exactly what light is, but what you're knowing is a mystery. What you're knowing is an open-endedness. What you're knowing is an infinity, an unresolvability. And, you know, the point isn't my words or the ideas. The point is to check it out for yourself. You know, explore your own experience by feeling what it is, not by analyzing it or thinking about it, but just feel what it is. Feeling is extremely intelligent. You know, we think of, you know, typically humans think of, you have to think about it to be intelligent. Feeling is just feeling. But feeling is an astounding exercise of intelligence. In the instant, your intelligence, the inherent intelligence of your consciousness, perceives every detail of your visual field with no processing, with no process. It's not like the eye sees something and it takes a certain amount of time to loop around in your brain or something. It's like, oh, okay, let's see, that must be gray and that must be a blue. It's like, it's instantaneously there with absolute detail and precision. I mean, that's some incredibly intense processing chops. I mean, just the computer processing, like exercise of intelligence, just to immediately sensorially see everything you see in the instant, and it happens. You know, I mean, how can that happen? It's an exercise of inconceivably powerful intelligence, and the same. You know, all of the detail of what appears in one instant in your experience, and the consciousness, the intelligence, effortlessly, instantaneously assimilates all of it. Bang. You know, and just it's a continual, ongoing bang of, you know, all of this information. So, and it's basically felt. Light is felt. Light is not. There's no intermediation. You know, light is just. It's here, and we say, oh, but light. We see light, but see is just a euphemism for feeling with your consciousness. Consciousness feels the presence of light, which we call seeing. Consciousness feels the presence of sound, which we call hearing. Consciousness feels the presence of thought, which we call thinking or whatever. And all of these different, you know, flavors of energy are just instantaneously present. So the yoga of radiant presence consists of notice this feeling. Notice that, you know, experience is being felt. Radiance is being felt. All of these characteristics, all this information that is showing up is being felt spontaneously with inconceivable detail, inconceivable precision, just exactly as it is. And how does that happen? I mean, what's doing this? Where does consciousness come from? Where does this energy come from? Where does this inconceivable detail come from? And how weird is it that all this detail doesn't actually come together into anything coherent? And all of this conveys itself and reveals itself just palpably, just immediately, in the very texture of it, not by analysis or thinking of it. And so the yoga of radiant presence is, from time to time, whenever, you know, whatever, just feel the presence of this amazing fact, this amazing actuality that is here. Just feel it. You know, it's non-verbal. It's non-anything. It's just normalcy in one sense. But it's astounding, you know, and it's palpably astounding, and it's completely non-human. I mean, light's not human. What's human about sound? You know, light doesn't say that it's light. It's just this weird presence, right? You know, humans say, oh, but it's light. You know, it's made of photons which are emitted from, you know, nuclear reactions in the sun. Blah 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 blah. Bullshit. But all of that isn't light. That's just a lot of analysis. Light is this actuality that is present. And so again, you just feel the radiant presence, yoga of radiant presence. Feel the actuality that is here. Feel how completely spontaneous it is. Doesn't need to be done. Can't be not done. Can't be changed. Can't be improved. Can't be diminished. It's just here. And in feeling it, it will show you what it is. non-verbally, but with astounding implication and revelation. And it teaches you the non-human perspective, which is your perspective, because none of you are actually human beings. You may appear to be human beings as these small subsystems within your experiential field, but the experiential field is just a miraculous presence that is here. And this fact is obvious, palpable, and the whole trick is just notice that from time to time. And you'll notice it, and then you'll spin off and you'll think about this and you'll wonder about that, and okay, cool. So what you do is you notice it and like, whoa, this is cool. And then you spin off and you go off and running. Okay, cool, fine, let it go. Don't try to cling to it or hold it. It doesn't need to be held because it's not going to go away. And then sooner or later, in a second or a minute or an hour or a day or a week or a month or a year or 50 years, you'll remember to notice it again. And you'll feel it, and you'll check, and you'll whoa, And every time you do that, it basically reprograms yourself to be with yourself as you actually are, more nakedly, and to be less addicted to orienting towards this actuality in terms of a human framework of interpretation. Now, there's nothing wrong with human framework of interpretation. It's fine. It's not like it needs to be eliminated. It's not evil. It doesn't need to be destroyed. It's just not true, and it's not comprehensive. So you'll find yourself kind of multitasking, where you sort of play at being a human when it's convenient, but you have this luscious richness as an actuality that's just always here and always available. And every time you tune into it, which becomes easier and easier and clearer to do, you get that lusciousness, you get that fullness, you get that transcendental nature. And it's just yummy, it's cool, it's great, it's, that is the yoga of radiant presence. This is the yoga of radiant presence.
So when thoughts or whatever so automatically comes this seemingly natural propensity to narrow the focus and to run things out, all that jazz. I guess the problem is when there's effort to restrict that, it just seems to pop out in some other way.
But all of that is radiant presence.
Yeah.
The focusing.
So you get under that somehow.
You don't even need to get under it. You just, after a while, you notice that is radiant presence. Nothing departs from radiant presence. Getting lost in thought, getting carried away in your perspective is radiant presence.
But I guess maybe it's the noticing of that.
Yeah.
That makes the difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the noticing becomes
instead of just living it,
The noticing becomes intrinsic, and you are in fact living it all the time. Yeah. And the noticing enables you to come to notice that you are in it all the time, and ultimately there's no departing from it, because it's not like being lost in thought is the opposite of radiant presence. It's just it's just a human perspective of describing an arbitrary mode of radiant presence.
But it seems like an overlay.
It seems like it, but it isn't.
Well, maybe it's just
because
imagination that it's
exactly. The fantasy is that it's oh no, this is thought. I'm lost in thought. It's unreal. Let me go back to reality. Yeah. That's a crock. How can you go to unreality? What would it be made of?
It's a hard thing to describe. What you're saying.
It's impossible to describe. It's not even hard. It's impossible. I mean, all of this. I'm just talking bullshit, because what I'm saying is not accurate. Because what is accurate, what this actually is completely beyond words. It cannot be described. I mean, I do my best to indicate it as clearly as I can, but I fail miserably. If you follow my words and expect them to actually precisely indicate anything or mean anything, you're shit out of luck.
What I find is that your words push you off the cliff. I mean,
well, it's a trick.
The nexus of the noticing. The middle of that synesthetic sparkler of all that, instead of following it, which is, as you say, is more of that, there's nothing actually to say right there at it.
Yeah, because talking is it.
Right.
And it's not there's no opposite of reality. There's no opposite of actuality. And noticing this yoga is discovering that inclusiveness, which of course the inclusiveness melts all partiality. It melts all pretense and arrogance of separation and partiality, and that this is this and that's that, and oh, I'm a failure, or I'm a success, or I need this, or I don't need this, or all that stuff just melts in pointlessness in the face of this absolute inclusiveness of actuality, which is the way it is. It's inclusive the way it is, not some inclusiveness that makes sense that you can do or not do. It already is everything. So, you know, it's the alchemist talked about the universal solvent, the water that dissolves everything, that dissolves the lead so it can turn into gold. You know, this is alchemy is I mean, it's totally bizarre and baroque and psychotic in its complexity and absurdity, but it's basically a veiled way of talking about all this stuff, which they couldn't talk about more explicitly because of the Inquisition back in those days, which was even a lot worse than modern inquisitional attitudes. But yeah, this actuality is the universal solvent. The nature of what this is intrinsically dissolves and includes without needing to eliminate everything that it's not. So all these partialities, all these partial interpretations just settle into this without needing to not be there. It's not like an either or where you, oh, I need to not, I'm thinking again. Oh no, I'm not noticing I'm thinking. It's like, no. Thinking is not thinking. Thinking is this. Anyway, it's very paradoxical to try and talk about, and we talk about doing it or not doing it, and all that's a bunch of gibberish. But nonetheless, regardless of that, it's possible to play with this stuff, and it's possible to do so usefully and powerfully. It's possible to do so effectively. I mean, this stuff can really, you can really get some mileage out of tripping on this stuff, out of playing with this stuff. And it turns out to be not just some little interesting sidelight of, oh, isn't that curious? It turns out to be the pinnacle. All of spirituality is about nothing other than this. You know, I mean, you go to all the absolute grandiose stuff, you know, of, you know, self-realization and universality of Brahman and Shiva Shakti. All of that is mythologizing this actuality that's right here. So this is the absolute pinnacle of spirituality. It's the pinnacle of human endeavor. And of course, paradoxically, it's what's always been the case, and it's never not been the case. So what's that about? How can it be the pinnacle of anything? And yet it is, you know.
Could you call it the very essence of life, or
no, sure, it's
before life?
It's not even the essence. It's not. It's the essence and the flesh and the whole show. It's inclusive. You know, it's just the whole deal. Because it is what's doing itself, and it is what's being done. So it's the essence and the principle and the motive force and the details and the substance and the embodiment and the working out and all of it. The sort of, it's, you know, it makes its own gravy. It's doing itself exclusively. So again, you know, you can sort of approach it in terms of these partializations, but it's not, it itself is not partial. So, you know, when you look at this itself, all these partializations just, you know, cease in relevance there. But you can look for the source and think of this as the source. Sure, it is the source. So cool. But then you can't isolate a source. You know, like radiant presence. Okay, this is presence. It's present. It's undeniably present. But you can't isolate presence. You know, it's radiant. It's undeniably just full of all this information, all these, you know, vibes and qualities, right? But you can't isolate or separate out the radiance from the presence. The radiance is present. The presence is radiant. So, you know, verbally, it sort of is, it comes in two words or two ideas or something, but it's not like that. It's itself. It is its own source It is its own cause. It is its own effect. It is its own process. It is its own substance. It is its own object. It is its own subject. I mean, so all of these human ways of trying to parse it and partialize it and separate out the components of how it works turn out to be basically irrelevant. Because again, what it really is so weird and so unaddressable in terms of this kind of either-or logic that human logic includes, and human semantic systems include. And you just get this weird infinite inclusiveness that everything is, while not eliminating words, not eliminating logic, not eliminating discussion, but what's actually here transcends utterly and includes all that, and just in ways of inconceivable weirdness.
When I work at trying to be with actuality or be with it, so it does, like you often say, it's subtle energy. So it kind of starts at being with this in the subtle energy, but then as things open up and move into infinities and infinite information and all that, then it's almost like drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, it's almost like
Totally.
then I can't, it seems like I have to back up like being scorched with a fire or something. But it's almost, my question is, it almost seems like over the years, it's like somehow my energy needs to shift to be more with its energy or vibration or something, I don't know the right words, for it to be with it more completely. Otherwise, it's just so overpowering, you can't stay with it.
Sure.
Does that, could you talk about that, or does that,
You could
fantasy
say,
or?
well, both. Both and neither, of course. I mean, yeah, you do need to, in a way, you need to shift to be with it as it is, and you become it to be with it as it is. But what it is also intrinsically slippery, intrinsically unstable, intrinsically morphing. So it continually spins off from itself. So when you're being with it, you'll just continually notice it's like, woo, I was feeling presence, and all of a sudden, woo, you just don't know where you're going. You're just spinning off into whatever, You can't even, obviously there's no words. It's just some, you're sort of, whoa, off and running somewhere. But that is the presence. That is the radiance. Because it, by its very nature, spins off from itself continually. I mean, that's part of the weirdness of it. So learning to be with it is learning to discover that you're never not with it, and it's never with itself, in the sense of being stably locked onto something. Being with it is to spin off, because that's what it's doing. It's continually spinning off from itself. An image that I kind of like, reality is kind of like a sparkler, those little sparklers that, it's like there's just shooting off all of these sparks, all these seemings, all these, whatever, perspectives, vibes, points of focus. So if you look at your experience, my experience, I'm assuming your experience, it dances around, it zooms, I'm thinking of this and I see that and I'm this and I'm feeling that and I'm remembering this. And it's just this bizarre roller coaster of just morphing uncontrollably into all of these disparate perspectives, right?
I had this one experience where it was like all of creation was like Michelangelo's moment of when he visualized the data. It was just like infinite creativity and knowledge and information. It just instantaneously got to it's just a big ocean of energy.
Sure.
Where that's just always happening.
Sure. And in the next instant, that morphs into something else, and all of a sudden you're thinking of a Mickey Mouse cartoon or something, which is the same thing.
It's the absolute joy of creation.
Yeah. I mean, radiant presence is so weird because what's the word? I have a nice, concise way of putting it. Inaccurate, of course, but concise. Radiant presence is so weird because it can and will continually look different than itself, but it never departs from itself. So this continually seems to be changing to something else, but it never departs from itself one iota. But that's the paradox. It's continually spinning off from itself. It's continually, whoa, you're continually kind of just off and running in some whatever way, right? You can't characterize it. And yet, it never goes anywhere. It's always just this here, now. And so it's weird. It's inhuman. It's not logical. It's completely paradoxical and transcendental. Transcendental, not in some mystical sense, although in every mystical sense, but that's not the point. It transcends resolution. It transcends getting a handle on it. It transcends describability. It transcends, just pulling it into anything in any way whatsoever. It is as it is, and that even that fundamental fact cannot be resolved or found, right? I mean, how weird is that? Even the fundamental fact of its presence, you can't find it. It's undeniable, but you can't find it. So everything is explicit, palpably obvious, and completely unfindable. I mean, could it be any weirder? Could it possibly be any weirder? And so learning to be with it is learning to be with weirdness, because that's what it is. But of course, in another sense, it's very familiar because we've always been with weirdness. You've never been anywhere else, right? I mean, this experience is what it is. The only reason it seems weird is because it is so utterly foreign to human perspectives. It's so utterly, in human perspective, human logic follows an either or. Things either that are this or are that. And reality is not like that. Reality is sort of both and, maybe, or not. I mean, what kind of logic is that? Is this here? Yeah, no, maybe. I don't know. And yet it is all of that. But humans want to sort of dance from one to the other and have it be that. But this isn't like that. This is always both and. So it's a weird, because we're so heavily brainwashed typically in human logic and human approaches to things. It's dizzying. You first start playing with this stuff. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. But fortunately, it teaches itself. It shows itself how to be with itself through direct engagement, through direct attention, through just sort of non-verbally feeling the actuality of experience and feeling what it is as it is. Just open-endedly. Don't worry about what that means or anything. Just sort of do it anyway, because you're always doing it, so it's easy to do. In fact, and you just feel that, and it shows you how to do it. You get better at it just by doing it, and it's not like how or there's a process or you can do it right or wrong. It just kind of happens. And so sort of miraculously, just through being with this open-endedly, it teaches itself, i.e. shows you how to be with itself more intimately and more open-endedly, which again shows you how to be with it more intimately and open-endedly. And it's just sort of a feedback loop of just falling into itself, which is all it's ever been. I mean, that's all experience has ever been. It's your being falling into itself as all of these characteristics. It's a so-called flow of experience and all this. Why don't we take a 5-minute break and just get up and get a tea and have a pee and walk around?
Tea and tea.
Pee and tea.
Perfect.
Maybe tea and pee would be a little.
Have to do a quick check. Okay. The right order.
Whenever we drive into our driveway, people say, well, look at that, it's time for tea. Meaning checking his email. We have tea all day long.
I love you're talking about light, and the light is just doing amazing things. Coming in
Light
the
is
window and highlighting.
Light is the coolest thing there is. I mean, like everything's the coolest thing there is, but light is the coolest thing there is.
You can't beat fall light.
Oh man, it's just so wonderful. It's so wonderful. So obviously astounding.
So you're lucky. Have a fast metabolism.
No, I didn't want to read watcher since I was 12 years old.
Really? So you just.
It's a subset. it's an imaginary sub portion. It's not actually a portion. It's not actually a sub. Yeah.
Realizing that becomes part of your body.
Synesthetic?
Yeah.
Synesthetic?
A lot of mine
Yeah.
talking about the bandwidth. As you say, they, on first glance, they definitely look like they're taking up their own individual place.
Totally. Oh yeah, it's all one thing. It's all one thing.
So how is it? Like, I'd love you to talk about that a little bit. Just I just know a lot of people say a lot of mileage does that.
No, for sure.
They are different and never collide because they're all the same person.
Sure. Well, bring it up. Yeah, bring it up when we regroup.
Because that feels like that's the center of the sport. That's where
Yeah.
like the brain.
Well, but you see, that teaches itself very intimately. But when you begin to sort of do noticing, when you begin to press your experiential field, you get to this one thing that's present. It's not like there's not actually a separate field of vision over here and a separate hearing over here, a separate thought. We parse it. We imagine it's like that, and so we sort of hold that template in our imagination and imagine it's imposed on this. But when you just feel this actuality, it's just this sea of weirdness with all of these flavors that seem to sort of parse themselves into different textures. But when you look closely, it's not cut and dry. It's not. There's no boundaries. There's no, it all really smears into everything else.
It seemed to be the process that they had to look at the boxes, put on the table, and look at one at a time, just to see, oh yeah, that's the bum, that's the feeling of that.
Yeah, well, you can do that. I mean, that's part of the weirdness of this. Is you can focus in, you can dolly out, you can be very specialized, you can be more inclusive. And when you're doing that, even then you're not doing. You're just pretending to do that, and yet you actually are doing it too. So it's just endlessly weird. I mean, focus of attention is a really, really interesting phenomenon because attention spontaneously and intrinsically generates focus. You know, when you see it anywhere you look at the field of vision, and there's always the consciousness tends to dance around and you're seeing that spot and this spot. And it's unconscious, you don't even usually pay attention to it. But so this focus of attention is dancing around. And then when the focus of attention is on anything, it sort of becomes reified. It becomes more present, more clear, more sharp. And correspondingly, the field within which that is present, informationally, is less clear, less sharp, less present.
Is there a vantage point in the business where it's not being
the wedding? No, perhaps.
No, it endlessly implies reification. Reification isn't really reification. You look at that, and that's just more phenomena of focus.
No, I haven't talked about it with you yet.
Still never.
That's how that goes.
Yeah. And yet it presents with all this dynamism and all this seeming degrees of partiality and partialization, but none of that's ever actual. It's fucking crazy. It just seems to be like that, and it feels like it's that way, but then when you go looking for that precisely, it doesn't result in actually being that. It's just sort of kind of like that, but not really. And then you get kind of like that, but not really. And where does that lead you? And then that leads to something else, which is kind of like that, but not really. And you're just endless surfing and endless dancing through. It's kind of almost like this, but not quite. Almost like this, but more than that. And it's always like that. It never settles down. It never resolves into actually being anything or not being anything. It's just, I mean, the daunting, challenging thing about this is how weird it is. This is so weird. Yeah, the fantasy is that, okay, it's weird, but somewhere there's some non-weirdness here. And it's like, no, it ain't gonna happen. Yeah.
Okay, it's weird. No, it's weirder than weird.
No, yeah, it's weirder than weird.
With a few hours in nutrition, it's like, yeah, you've done this for like 20 hours.
So, Peter, would you say that it has, that it wants, I feel like I want to please it.
And what do you mean by that?
I don't know, but I feel like naturally I want to please it. Do what it wants.
Well, you do want to, because it wants to please it. It wants to please itself. It wants to explore itself. It wants to find itself. And this ongoing phenomena of what we call experience is it's looking at itself, finding itself, but it never, even though it finds itself continually, it never actually finds itself finally. And that whole exploration is pleasing. And the fantasy of actually approaching some resolution is pleasing. And the failure to actually do so is pleasing. So this, in one sense, you could say God is the ultimate narcissist. What you're experiencing is a completely self-indulgent enjoyment of an exploration of itself intrinsically, and that's all it's doing. And every aspect of that, as well as its seeming motivations and what it's looking for, so to speak, is always this pleasing. But it's intrinsic. It's not like you're a separate thing from it over here. And you could. It's more like this vector. It loves itself. Reality loves itself, and experience is its celebration of that love. It's making love to itself. It's dancing with itself. It's exploring itself. It's just completely engaged with itself.
So when you say you're talking about the light and the light, if you do that, then people, if you pay attention in that way, it will teach you. So when you say it will teach you, what is that? What is that?
You can't say it teaches you the subtlety of what it is and how to be with it. That's subtle.
Yeah, I know, and I feel that it's teaching me. What is teaching me?
Well, you can't say. It's not like it ever resolves.
So I feel like I want to please that same way that we can say.
Sure, but you do, and you always will. And the very quest to do so is pleasing. It's like it's never endingly engaged with itself, and it's searching for pleasing, and that search itself is pleasing. So it's the whole schmear. This is it. This is you.
You couldn't displease it.
No. Itself, its very nature. It's a dynamism. That's why I like the word. Yeah, it's totally life. We're talking about the life force here. I mean, that's why I like this word radiant, because it intrinsically shines forth. It has a vector. It's not just inert and passive and sort of sitting there. On the contrary, it's like, it's doing. It's alive. It's totally alive. It's totally radiant. It's totally creative. Totally aware. It's all of that, without any of those being separate components from each other. It's the animal. Yeah. But partialization never disappears, and unity. Let's just say dissolution into lack of resolution never disappears. So it always will tend to sort of emerge as partializations, and these partializations will never succeed in actually becoming partializations, and they merge back into the whole.
That irresolvability, it means irresolvability. It's like, when you talk about, how to be with nature, how to hold oneself in respect. It still also feels like a separation between two. But there's a fantasy that I'm realizing is a
Well, bring all this stuff up in a few minutes when we reconvene. This is all good stuff. I mean, the principle is so simple on just one thing, but all the nuances and the details are infinite ramifications. Yeah. And you're getting lost in them. I mean, and yet that very getting lost in them is it. It's what it does. That's what being with it is like.
The life force, whatever. I felt that at one point in my life, I felt like I saw everything for a very long period of time, over a year. But I felt like because I didn't recognize everything, I couldn't function. So it was like the life force for me to function, and I wanted it's like I needed to close it down to function.
Yeah. Well, it's another good thing. Bring that up when we get back together.
So you're still live and you can gather us.
Why don't we regroup, gravitate back here to the here-ness. That's the corridor, the sacred corridor against the mason jar. Tibetans do that. They grab a quarter and smash on them. Okay, so we're back. As always happens when we split up, we had some wonderful, scintillating conversations here. Maybe we'll have some more.
It was something fractaling off with about 4 conversations in my head right now. But the one thing was the ever departing from itself being the condition.
Yeah.
And that was a huge penny dropping, that there wasn't like, oh, look, like there was some vantage point outside of the departing from itself, that I can sit at the middle of the sparkler and not be sparkling off.
Right.
No, it's peeling off from itself, and never departing from itself, but always looking different. Is it?
Yeah.
Never. There is no vantage point to sit and go, there it is, and I'm not a part of that. It's just doing. No, that is.
Yeah. To spin off. Yeah. To spin off from it is to be it. Is to be with it, because it is continually spinning off from itself.
Right.
But of course, it never actually departs from itself, and this becomes clearer and clearer as you are with this astounding condition, and you get this continual spinning off, but you won't go anywhere. Here it is. Always here it is, and yet it's always like, it's always slipping away, and yet it never slips away.
Right.
Endless.
And that's what it is.
Endless. And that is what it is.
Right.
When you have a naive or a simplistic approach, beginners in spirituality often come to this. You try and meditate and think meditation is supposed to be some stability, right? Okay, I'm gonna like lock down, everything's just gonna like boom and stop, right? It doesn't happen.
It shows you that's not the
case. And when you start to meditate, unless you're just really adamant, I mean, some people, it's easy to get into meditation and pretend you're doing that. Pretend, okay, now I'm not thinking, now I'm meditating. But of course, that's a pretense, because in actuality, there's an intrinsic dynamism. It's continually spinning off and flowering, and true meditation, powerful meditation, is noticing that, this is always tripping. It's always like, woo, it's always, flying off somewhere, and you're with something, and you get some insight, something like, woo, you're just all of a sudden, where am I now, And you think, oh, I'm supposed to hold that. No, you can't hold it. There's nothing to hold, because the spinning off is being with it. Spinning off with it is holding it. And so, as one matures, it teaches you that the most intimate way of being with it is to completely let it be free.
Which is what it's doing.
Let it run. Yeah, which is what it's doing, because it's letting itself run and absolutely not departing from itself. Absolutely.
Like that's so, it's like the back of the book answer of, I mean, the point of the noticing is that the noticing notices that noticing is the only thing that's happening. So noticing isn't something you do, noticing is something you discover that you are.
Yeah. This is all about discovering the intrinsic condition,
Right.
discovering what is always spontaneously the case.
Right.
And then when you discover that and you're with it and you get mature with it, you discover there's nothing but, and never has been. There's nothing but this doing itself, and there's no alternative to that. It's not
And it
like,
couldn't have ever not been the case.
Yeah.
Retroactively or
No.
whatever.
no, it's all a dizzying. I mean, that it could ever have seemed to not be such.
Seems the crazy part.
It is crazy. It's pure psychosis. I mean, the normal human condition is basically total insanity.
Right.
And this bizarre condition of absolute paradox actually turns out to be complete sanity, because it's the nature of reality. Reality is this slippery spontaneity, and reality is not, crossing the T's and dotting the I's necessarily.
How do you get to that? Do you get to the point where you don't have to meditate, where it just
Totally.
happens naturally, or do you spend time trying to get?
Well, I mean, fortunately, it shows you how to be with it. When you begin to just start flirting with this stuff, you start going, okay, now I'm going to just feel what's here. What's here automatically? What's here spontaneously? What is just here? It's doing itself, and you kind of do that, and you go, wow, and then okay, now I'm not feeling what's here. Now let me go back and feel what's here. So you come back, but by doing that, it shows you how to do it better. It shows you what it is. It educates itself. It educates you just by that engagement. Teaches you how to do that engagement better, and ultimately you discover that there's never been anything but that engagement, and it's doing itself, and so you don't even need to do it anymore, because you're pretending to do it or not do it because you've never been doing anything but. But it's all a very strange, crazy game of pretense in a way, and yet it's also real. That's not a way of dismissing it. It's weird. It's just completely and utterly weird. But the good news is, in practice, it's very, very, very simple. Just feel this actuality. That's all. Just feel this actuality. Whatever that means. Don't worry about how do I feel actuality. Who cares? Just do it. Just like, this is here. I'm feeling this. Wow. And okay, whatever, right? And then sooner or later, feel the actuality. And of course, after a while, it'll get through your thick skull. Am I ever not feeling actuality? Have I ever been not feeling actuality? And so, which is nice, because the implication is you lighten up, you loosen up, you're like, wow, cool, this is it, and it's always been it, and it can't not be it. And so then what do? You do whatever you do. Which you've always been doing, but you can do it better, if anything, because you're looser and more spontaneous about it.
Because we spend our lives having to have like a long-term plan. And
Oh yeah, we're pretending. All of
that.
that. It's so much work, and we're pretending to have
So much
control,
work.
and pretending to have working to get a handle on things and all this. And when you discover you don't have to do that, like, oh God, what a load off.
Right.
So, oh wow, that's already taken care of. I don't need to carry the weight of the world on my back. Wow, how nice.
Well, I hope, I'm sure this will cheapen it considerably, but my expression of it. But there are times when I've been stoned, which has been, I've been able to seemingly get to, certain place. I mean, there's meditation and all that as well.
Sure.
But certainly, all of this messing around somehow with running something out to an extreme, somehow there's this perspective underneath it.
Sure.
And I'm not advocating getting stoned.
Well, advocate away. I mean,
necessarily. I'm not pushing it. I'm not a pusher.
no, that's fine. You don't need to be. But getting stoned, of course, is an actuality. And getting stoned, what getting stoned actually is of course this actuality. So there's no reason
But
it's
somehow
not
it's like the mental process is a little different.
true. But the,
So
but
it
the
gives
mental
you a
process
different
is
perspective.
infinitely different than itself. You go to sleep, the mental process is different.
Yeah,
You start dreaming, it's different. You get in a pissy mood and it's different. You know, you get in a fight or you get mad, it's different. I mean, different is what we got. It's continually morphing and spinning off from itself and going into this and that. But it's always, but this is what it is that does that. And all of the doing that is this being what it is. Yeah. I mean, the real stumbling point is as humans, we're used to thinking in terms of either or. It's this or that. I'm either with it or I'm not with it. I'm getting it or I'm not getting it. And this isn't like that. This is always it. It's always full on, you know. Not getting it is getting it. This makes absolutely no sense. That's a very profound revelation. Yeah, this makes absolutely no sense. And yet it makes scintillating sense and can be the manifestation of astounding intelligence and functionality.
So you could say that
No contradiction.
you could say that abstraction is it, but the content of abstraction.
That's it too. I mean, how could it happen if it wasn't it? That this can have fantasies and be with those fantasies as if they're actuality, hypnotically or whatever. How can that happen? This does that. You know, I mean, you know, in terms of sort of the classical description of the path of spirituality, where one is seduced into or falls into or finds oneself in ignorance, where you're basically relating to this inaccurately in terms of fantasies, inaccurate fantasies of what it is, and then you enter a path of spiritual unfoldment, where progressively or however you come to discover and see what this actually is, which solves the inaccuracy of the relating to fantasies. So all of that is being done by this. The nature of this is to forget itself. The nature of this is to find itself. And when it finds itself, it never finds itself. And it discovers that not finding itself is finding itself because it's not something that's findable. And that's the profound fact. And so when you find that fact, when you find you can't find it, you found it.
So being comfortable living without conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever had any conclusions? I mean, come on, get real here. Have you ever gotten a handle on anything?
Conclusions.
Yeah, right. You're just a good spin doctor, that's all. We're all good at pretending we have a handle on things. Or some of us are maybe better than others of us at pretending we have a handle on things. But if you get honest, you know, I mean, a lot of this really simplistically is just about getting real. You know, I know I've always been clueless. I know I've never had a handle on anything. You know, I've developed a lot of skill at being able to fake it and pretend as if I, you know, had a clue. But the actual fact is I never have and I never will. And that turns out to be good news. Contrary to the normal human view where you're never supposed to admit you don't know anything. Keep pretending. You know, no, I'm good. I'm successful. I know things. I'm functional. I can, you know, don't lock me up. Don't shoot me. Don't send me to jail. You know?
Is it teachable?
Yes and no. Yes and no, isn't it? I mean, it is communicable. There's a Dzogchen teacher. Dzogchen is Tibetan. Is a Tibetan Buddhistic version of basically what we're talking about here. And there's a Dzogchen teacher I know who has a very cute saying that is in many ways pithy, which is that Dzogchen can't be taught, but it can be caught. So it is teachable in a way, but the teachability is itself strange and nonlinear, and it's more of a contagion or a communication irrationally, somehow some kind of a resonance or some kind of a, you know, getting a sense of something, you know, and you don't know what it is you're getting a sense of, and you don't know how you're getting it, but somehow that can seem to happen anyway. Yeah. And the circumstance within which that happens is not contrivable and strange in itself, or not, or you try to get it and you're, you know, banging your head against the wall, you know, spending your whole life being a spiritual seeker and studying this and seeing that, and you go into this meeting and that meeting. But yeah, I mean, is it teachable? I mean, that's the right, so it's sort of the paradox. I mean, the way that's the koan, is it teachable?
Sounds like no.
Well, but it's not a no or a yes. It's not like that. Maybe. Reality is discoverable. I will say that as an absolute truth, but of course you have to discover, or one has to discover that for oneself. But it is discoverable, so I would say, on the basis of my argument, that is a doable thing. Whether or not that constitutes teaching or being taught or not is sort of a fine point.
So it's discoverable, not necessarily teachable.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, who knows?
Rememberable.
I mean, this whole thing that we're doing here it's weird. I mean, in one sense, I'm sitting here spouting gibberish or poetry or something. You know, nothing I have said so far is accurate. So in a way, nothing I've said is truth. So in a very specific way, everything I've said is a lie. But does that make it useless or valueless? I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. But the maybe no is interesting, right? It's like, you know, what's going on here is a lot of gibberish, but, you know, but so what? You know, is there any? But given that, then what?
Well, it's contagious gibberish.
Well, hopefully, right? I'm doing my best.
I guess it's like, what is transmission and all those things.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of theories in spirituality about, you know, I mean, in Zen Buddhism, there's the transmission of the mind outside the teaching, and you know, then in some Hinduist Kundalini sects, there's Shaktipat, or, you know, or grace, or, I mean, all these various sort of mythologizations of the fact that somehow discovery can seem to happen, and the sort of the process or the technique and all that is maybe mysterious or maybe just downright, or who knows what, weird. But you know, I mean, I'm here because I think that there's a reason to be. I think that it is doable, whatever that means, you know. And so, you know, I invite you to play with that and just, you know, flirt with it.
You're almost here to tell us you won't find the truth.
Sure. And not finding the truth is finding the truth in a very profound way, not just in a silly mind games way, or in a way of sophistry. You know, the fact that this is infinite and unresolvable turns out to be a very powerful, useful fact. You know, as opposed to the sort of the human logical point of view of, oh, I can't ever find what it is; it's useless. But it's exactly the opposite. The fact that you can't find what it is, and you never have found what it is, turns out to be very empowering, because it's not a kind of a thing that you can find out what it is. So you're kind of forgiven and off the hook of all this questioning of trying to find. It's like, well, no wonder I never found out what it is. and not only that, but it already is what it is. So in not finding out what it is to be most intimately, with absolute intimacy, with what it is. You know, so again, it it's powerful. It seems like a failure logically, but it's actually the very nature of success.
You won't get there.
You won't get there, and that turns out to be really good news.
There's not many teachers that'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Especially the big business ones.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm looking at this from different angles, so I'm thinking sociologically.
Sure.
I would venture to say that there's cultures that where this, if you want, this rediscovery or whatever we want to call it, might be more prevalent than others that are more onerous in their cultural demands.
Yeah, maybe so.
So there could be even relatively primitive cultures that have an expansiveness about them.
Sure.
No,
absolutely. But again, you can't. This, in my experience, I would say, this can't be sort of embodied culturally or embodied behaviorally. This is because it's individual. It's not a group thing. You know. Rediscovery of what this is something that happens to one, not to us, not to a group. And missing what this is, or being with what this is, let's call it immaturely or naively or heavy-handedly, is again an individual mode of engagement. And the very nature of this whole strange phenomena of unfoldment, or whatever you want to call it, is an intrinsic ignorance gradually maturing into an intrinsic sophistication or subtlety of being able to be with this, which happens again to an individual. So even within a culture, which is like, say you have a traditional Indian culture, which is traditionally oriented around religion or around explicit spirituality, as opposed to our materialistic culture, they celebrate that there are yogis, there are saints, there are these realized beings who actually exist and have existed, and and they practice yoga and these various other things and blah, blah, blah. But still in all, you look at that system, even though it's being explicitly put out there, you'll find that most people are just as clueless as most people here. Yeah. So it doesn't really help to have it be made explicit, because it can be mistook intrinsically, or it can be seen clearly intrinsically, and it doesn't seem to have a whole hell of a lot to do with how it's being put.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, the most accurate spiritual information possible, it can just be the basis of dogmatism and fanaticism and craziness. I mean, look at all religions. I mean, every religion that's ever been has been a person who has realized, who tried to share their realization, and it's turned into a monumental edifice of social conformity and stupidity.
And even in those environments of conformity and stupidity, you get the odd one out that it's like,
because again, it's down to the individual. Spirituality is not for the masses. Spirituality is for you. I mean, any you. It's always a you involved. It's never an us.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, it's just it seems to be that way.
And what you're pointing to, it doesn't even seem like there ever is an us. There really is only.
No, there is not an us.
What I can
Us is a fantasy.
Everything else is just imagination.
Yeah, basically.
What's going on over there is total imagination.
Of course. And it's only relevant to you to the extent it is you. What's happening anywhere is only relevant to you to the extent it's relevant to you, which again is you. So, I mean, you are the sole inhabitant of your experience. There's no one else seeing your experience. So your experience is a universe that's with a population of one. And so what matters obviously in that universe matters to that one, because there's no one else there for it to matter to.
So in a way, I'm teaching myself.
Absolutely.
As I hear.
Absolutely.
Seems to be coming from something outside myself.
And all the patternings, all the information is conveniences through which this teaching can occur. And it occurs through a kind of a bait and switch thing. It occurs by it's like an intelligence test. It seduces you into being confused about it until you get sophisticated and smart enough to be able to cut through that. So in a way, all the struggling we do and all the stupidity and the heavy-handedness we bring to our functioning is our very process of refining ourselves and developing more subtlety, developing more skillfulness of being able to, wait a minute, no, not that. I've been there, done that, and that, that doesn't get very far. That's not a vehicle of intelligence. I mean, this is all about intelligence, basically. And you can't say what that is. It's not like cleverness or studiousness or something. It's just about what's intelligence? I don't know. You can't say what intelligence is. But and all of this, and people, often will talk about, well, what do I do and how do I do it? It doesn't matter what you do. The only thing that matters is the intelligence with which you do it. You can do anything, and if you do it with intelligence, it will be very useful and powerful. And if you don't do it with intelligence, it'll just be, the usual, whatever.
in your description of the sensorium and the experience of, like it's kind of an invitation to experience what is it to be alive? What is it to be taking this in?
Yeah, we're talking about life. This is life here. Life is here. What is it? What is it that's here? And, you know, it's not an abstraction. On the contrary, life is very, very actual and very palpable. And, you know, check it out.
Yeah, I take it almost as a question, like to begin to embody that question. What is this to be alive? What is this?
Sure.
And, you know, you're pointing to it. You're inviting, you know, different degradations of light and this, but where it's landed here is, what is this?
Yeah. But the way to address that question is by feeling it. You learn it directly by direct engagement, not by analysis or thought or abstraction. It's like learning to swim or something. You don't learn to swim by thinking about it. You learn to swim by doing it until you get how to do it. You learn by doing. You learn how to be with life by being with life, and life shows you how to be with itself. You know, actuality shows you how to be with actuality.
It seems if this dialogue has any value, at least for this one, it's to raise that question and to invite the possibility that there's something way beyond what I think is here.
Yeah,
like take a look with an open mind, with an open question.
Yeah, and it is right here explicitly already right now. And in fact, you are already feeling it. So it's not even a question to consider for the future or something. It's just well, that's here. Yeah. And like, wow, cool. And then you can also be thinking about it and you know, being bemused by it and being with this, it's astoundingness, but that doesn't get in the way of anything. It's not an either or, you know, and you just feel the texture of what is here, you know, and thinking about it is part of the texture of what's here. Right? I mean, that's one of the dominant ways it shows up.
I've been reading The Course in Miracles and practicing the everyday practices, the lesson. And it really stresses that everything is through your brother. Love your brother, forgive your brother. That you can, the idea that everything is one. And that that you can only give what you have, and you will know if you have it by what you can, if you can give it. But I'm just wondering if you had, I always, because it stresses so much that it's through your brother, forgive your brother. Salvation is through your brother, through your brother. And in actuality, here we are, and there's always what seems to be another human being, or another brother.
Sure.
So I just wondered if you could comment on that.
Well, yeah, it's subtle. A lot of traditions and practices stress otherness, stress, you know, in Buddhism is stress of compassion, where you basically place others' welfare, other people's welfare above yourself. And, you know, there's various other, you know, traditions and so on that stress this aspect. This is a really nice aspect, a way of engaging non-egoically, engaging with things in a non-self-centered way. But again, and as you observe, there is always a profound degree of otherness in the experience. You know, I mean, all of this, what we're doing here, is totally about otherness. You know, I'm here about you, even though I'm here about me. But the vehicle of me being here about me is being here about you, and likewise on your end, right? So, you know, the way in which that is that, as with the way in which anything is not simplistic, and it's not simply this or simply that. It doesn't resolve to being simply this or simply that. And ultimately, what you will discover in any engagement will transcend the way in which you're approaching it. So what you discover by intimately being with other is completely transcends otherness. It doesn't negate it. It's just this, whoa, it's just something else entirely. And you know, this applies across the board. So in other words, any particular principle, like you know, through another, and these kinds of things, or compassion and so on, aren't important in themselves. They're important as a vehicle to discover more. And all what I'm proposing in this, in my relatively orientationless engagement, is sort of a maximum efficiency of bypassing these sort of intermediary expedients of holding it to be this way to discover it's more than that. Just go right to the more. But it doesn't really matter, because however you are with it, it will be useful to you in the way that it is. And it can't be contrived. So it's it kind of equalizes itself. I mean, what I present what I present in the way that I present it, because from my perspective, it's the maximally efficient. It's the most primal, the most, in other words, you can go through more elaborated techniques and paths and meditations and all that. But from my perspective, at best, they'll eventually take you to this. So you're going to be with this anyway. This is sort of the, it's like, I mean, the way sort of an amusing way I put this. Suppose there's a race, right, a running race, and there's a quirky rule in this race. You get to start the race anywhere you want to. I'm going to start the race at the finish line, right? You can start way back there if you want, but I'm going to go right at the finish line. It's like when the starting bell hits, I'm finished.
But there is no finish line.
No finish line. So it's kind of a matter of sort of directness. But again, it has to be real. It has to be actual for you, for the individual. So if you can't actualize it in a more, sort of naked, extreme way, then that's anyway you're with it. It doesn't matter. It's all good. But it takes you to the same place. There's only one reality, and that's where you're going. I mean, it's absurd to say that's where you're going. It's where you are and have always been, of course. But that's what the ultimate discovery is. And so all I advocate is, well, geez, start as close to the finish line as you can. Do yourself a favor. You can start like 20 miles back there if you want, but why not start right here?
Well, along those lines, I don't know, do you have anything to say about these things where, especially these channeled messages?
Oh, sure.
The book, The Course in Miracles,
Mm-hmm.
Of Course in Miracles, or Islam,
Sure. Oh, yeah.
The whole thing. I mean, these things come out in tremendous detail, and there's tremendous truth in it, like in the Course in Miracles.
Sure.
Just and it's all
or the Republican platform. I mean, that's another channel teaching. Or an advanced physics textbook. I mean, there's all of these. There's all of these sort of context of informational presentation, and they all have the worth and the utility that they have for a person who's in a position to work with them in the way that they are in a position to work with them.
Yeah.
And so it's, well, here's your choice. What are you going to do? You can read the physics text, or you can read the Course in Miracles, or you can read the Quran, or you can read Patanjali's yoga, or you can, or you can whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. All bets are off. It's like it's an open field, and here you are. And what are you going to do? Well, find out what you're going to do. There's all this information. And what I would recommend is find out what information is, and then rather than dancing with what information seems to be presenting, sort of a second hierarchy of, well, there's information and there's the content of information. Why not cut to what is information itself? And all of it, you're sort of undercutting that, and you're going to, well, what is the Quran made of? What's the Bible made of? What's the physics text made of?
Well, is it that it's just not is popularly acceptable? I mean, cutting to the chase is just a harder message to hear.
I don't know,
because it just seems like there's all religions and
I don't know.
detailed practices.
I think a lot of people are inclined to cater to a kind of a consensus perspective, but more or less because they get a better number count. If you're saying something that doesn't diverge too too radically from what people already think, it'll be real easy for them to jump on board, and you get a higher head count at your meetings. Whereas if you say, okay, let's start over again, let's reinvent the wheel,
Yeah.
forget everything you've ever thought and known, and let's start over again. You know, that's like, whoa, hold the phone, wait a minute. I thought this was going to be a spiritual meeting. I didn't know it was going to be like, you know, psychotics are us. You know, and so, you know, but again, different people have different degrees of adventuresomeness, and you know, I mean, another aspect of all this, another aspect of trying to present and communicate spirituality, is that people are not all the same. I mean, the fantasy is that, well, everyone's more or less the same. Completely wrong. Everyone is entirely and utterly unique, both in terms of their background, in terms of their potentialities, in terms of their strengths and weaknesses, their skill sets, you know, and there's no objective list of the qualities that make a successful yogi, that make a successful spiritual engager. You know, it's all down to the luck of the draw. If you happen to have some random skill set and sufficient, you know, non-neuroses or whatever, or sufficiently workable neuroses, so that somehow or other all of that can work together effectively, then lucky you. And if you don't, then, you know, process isn't going to fix that necessarily. Maybe it will, in which case you have that the particular conglomeration of energies in nature for that to work too. Who knows, right? So it's just sort of it's like you throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, you know. and you know, the same people, not all people are capable of the same kind of engagement. I mean, you could teach music, and some people are going to be totally tone deaf. Some, you know, a few people are going to be just basically, you know, inherent virtuosos and geniuses and prodigies who are just like, whoa, wow, I get it, this is so cool. And most people are going to be somewhere in the middle, and spirituality is kind of like that, you know. So, you know, you can present music, you know, you can say, okay, you know, here we have the musical scale.
Yeah.
You know, and they're very nice. I mean, you can start on the kindergarten level, or you can just go right to the cutting edge and get some you know, inconceivable, you know, Beethoven genius just really, you know, spilling his guts. And some people are going to be able to click with that, and a lot of people aren't. And the simplistic kindergarten approach, some people are going to really click with that, and a lot of people aren't. So it's all down to, you know, just what clicks, you know, getting the gears to mesh. And there's no predictability. You have no control. I have no control over who I'm talking to, and you have no control over who's talking to you, except through the sort of random selection of and happening to end up here, whatever that happens to look like in terms of choice or accident or whatever, right?
Seeming choice.
Yeah, I mean, all of that. But it's all a crapshoot. It's all like, well, hey, you know, I don't know what it is. I don't know how it is. Does it work or not? No, I don't know. You know, that's sort of again, it's always a kind of a koan. They're always with like, what's going on here? And it's always that. I mean, it's the very highest levels of spirituality. It's basically, what's going on here? I mean, that is very, very high level yoga. I mean, you know, what's going on? But it has a whole different tenor to it for a beginner than for an advanced yogi.
Sure.
Although even though it's exactly the same.
You know, what's often helped me is when you talk about what there's actuality, and then once you make some assumption or have the beginnings even of any frame of reference, you're lost. You're in samsara. You're in subjective reality, which are just made up.
Yeah.
So that's where coming back to reality.
Sure.
Is that what is this actuality?
Yeah.
Has been so helpful.
Sure, good. Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the weird aspects of actuality is that it is absolutely cannot be captured. It cannot be resolved as being this or that, as being any particular way. And so anytime you seem to be in a situation or in a mindset or something where things seem to be a certain way, where things seem to be this or that, that's a red flag that you're wrong. You're in imagination. You're in fantasy. You're being with this in erroneously. Whereas when it's sort of a question mark, particularly a kind of a luscious, interesting question mark, then that's a potentially better indicator. Yeah.
So like I'm looking out the window and the sun was shining onto the leaves and it's real pretty outside, right? And that's all in my imagination.
No.
Well,
No. That there are leaves is your imagination. That it's pretty is your imagination. But the phenomena itself is completely actual.
But to feel like I just kind of want to know if I'm on the sort of right track.
Yeah.
I almost can feel like I'm immersed in that.
You are. You're totally immersed in it. And then imagination comes along and starts a narrative. It starts a description. It starts saying, oh, this is this and that's that, and this is like this and looks like that. And the narration is actual. It's actually happening. But what it's saying is inaccurate because the this that you're immersed in is describable in those terms, but it is more than those terms. Like I can say, let me give you an example. I can say, there's a bunch of people sitting in a room and they're talking about spirituality. Okay, that's a description of what's happening here. It's not inaccurate, but does that completely capture every detail of the experience of what it's like to be here, of what's going on here? It's laughable. It's absurd. No. All the colors and shapes and textures and moods and thoughts are completely skipped over by that simple description. So I'm looking out the window and I'm seeing the sun and the leaf. Okay, that's true, but is that the whole truth? Is that really comprehensively what is here? It doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. And that's cool. But to notice that fact, notice the richness of, wow, what is not included in that narration? What's not included in that description? That's here too. You didn't talk about the curtains, you didn't talk about the crystal in the window, you didn't talk about this, that, and the other, but they're here too, right? So the fact that you're not talking about them doesn't negate them, and the fact that you are talking about them doesn't actualize them. It's just a whole sea, a soup of all sorts of qualities that are all here, and then the mind settles on one or two, on a few that are interesting, and turns that into its narration, what it's pretending to pay attention to. But everything else is present too. Even what you're not paying attention to, what's not included in the description, it's also here.
But to feel like you're kind of like immersed in that.
Yeah, well you are, sure. Yeah, that's it, the immersion. Yeah.
Right, it's kind of indescribable, but
totally indescribable. But it's palpable, right? You feel it. You feel the immersion, even that it is immersion is like, well, that's not really an accurate description, but it kind of refers to this richness, this intimacy, right, of all these flavors. That's all there is, that feeling, that intimacy, feeling that richness, feeling that immersion. And it's always present. And you can notice it, you can pay more or less attention to it, or you can get distracted by whatever, and that's cool. But it's here, and then you can sort of notice it again, and when you notice it again, you notice it didn't really ever go anywhere, I just wasn't really paying attention. But even when I'm not paying attention, it's that.
If the mind wants to say immersion comes and goes, but
sure.
And immersion is almost not an intimate, even though it feels like an intimate word, it's not intimate enough.
No.
Find any poetry to make more intimate what this is.
No, it doesn't become more itself by spin doctoring, but it doesn't become less itself by spin doctoring. Right. So you can be totally lost in in partial descriptions, and reality hasn't gotten any smaller, any less amazing. Yeah, but the trick is not that there's a right way or a wrong way. The trick is just play with this in any way that seems to click for you to any degree at all. And it just becomes fun. It becomes interesting. It's like, whoa, what's that? There's something here. What is it? I don't know. And then you find your own way. You find your own sort of level with it, your own, your own, what's interesting to you for it, what's valuable to you, if anything. And you play with it, from time to time. That's all. And that turns out to be ultimately very powerful. Just flirting with it and playing with it, even just peripherally. It has a potency that you wouldn't necessarily expect or anticipate before the fact. Wait a minute, I'm just hanging out here. This can't be powerful. I'm just hanging out. What?
Could you share some examples of how you play with it, if you do?
Oh gosh, well, mainly by what we've been doing here. Or
on a more practical level, on a day-to-day existence.
Well, for me, I just do what I do, and that's playing with it. I mean, I'm basically a hedonist. I like to eat good food. I like to see pretty sights. I like to hear nice music. I like, when I'm tired, I like to get a good night's sleep, and I like to see interesting entertainments. It's fun to see a movie that is exciting or something. So there's all of these experiential textures that are appreciated by engaging with them, and I'm drawn to what I happen to be drawn to, because who knows what? Because if I am what I am, I mean, God knows what, right? But so I'm drawn to what I'm drawn to, and that becomes a vehicle of enjoying this lusciousness, which is not any different than anyone does. But it's a matter of not adding more to it than that. It's a matter of not saying, well, I'm doing this in order to achieve that. It's just letting the simple fact, letting the simple present engagement be as luscious as it is.
How about when, like that, those were all very desirable, pleasant scenarios.
Sure.
So what about the undesirable?
Okay, cool. No, good point. Very good.
Like
So
the shit hits the fan.
Yeah,
and
shit
you
hits
just got a terrible, God forbid, diagnosis of something
Sure.
that is devastating.
Sure.
Or whatever.
Or you have a toothache.
Or whatever, right. Or you have a toothache. That's
or
perfect.
your significant other pisses you off and you're just really angry.
Right. Like how do you play or put it into play when the shit hits the fan in those scenarios?
Well,
yeah.
what
does that look like? The toothache. Let's go with the toothache.
Yeah, toothache is a good one.
Yeah.
Because everyone has familiarity with that to some degree.
Right.
And it's just amazing. It's not that it's nice. It's not that you like it. I mean, yeah, you try, by all means try to, take an aspirin or put some medicine on it, or get the dentist to come in the middle of the night or whatever. By all means fix it if you can. But it's this amazing experience. It's like, whoa, what is this? This incredible electrical light show in my mouth, It's so distracting and so absorbing, and you sort of hate it, and then at the same time it's sort of strangely attractive and fascinating, You can't actually direct your attention away from it. So it's like my tooth is a little sore when I poke it, so I keep poking it over and over again. Like, what the fuck? But when you're walking down an alley and you smell like a really bad smell, and so what do you do? Smell it again, sniff again. It's like, what's it? But so there's always an enjoyment of the lusciousness of experience, even if it's unpleasant. And it's not that it needs to be pleasant; it needs to be made pleasant. Unpleasantness itself is an astounding phenomenon. I mean, how does that happen?
So let's stick with this toothache.
Yeah.
So you're in excruciating pain, and it's
Right.
not just like, oh, I'm going to stick my tongue there again, but
Right.
Whether I stick my tongue there or not, it hurts.
Right.
In that moment, in pain, and you can't get to the dentist for
Right.
whatever reason.
Sure.
So how do you take this insight that you clearly have? How do you take that and shift the resistance of the pain?
You don't. You don't need to shift. There's nothing wrong with resistance. Resistance is fine.
So you're in pain. You don't
You're
like
hating, you're hating it. You're in
it. That's
pain.
what I was about
You
to
really
say.
wish you weren't in pain.
You don't like the pain, right? You're hating the
All
pain.
of this, a symphony of
Okay.
stimuli and reaction to stimuli and emotionality and obsessiveness and all of this just in hurricane is like, whoa, and you're just being whirled around by it. And what a trip.
And so
I mean, what do? You're in the middle of the night and your tooth is aching and there's no dentist. What do you do?
Exactly.
What do you do? I do what you do. It's like, whoa.
No, I don't think you do what I do. That's kind of what I'm trying to find out. Yeah, I don't think we're doing the same thing. So
Well, maybe we are.
So that's why I'm asking.
Okay.
Because
Well, what do you do?
That's right. I was just going to say, what I'm doing is resisting it.
Right.
I'm hating it.
How much good does that do? You're here. I'm resisting my toothache. Okay, good. Now what? That did a lot.
And, and I've taken it so far as to say, okay, this pain is a memory from a previous pain, or I'm projecting that the next moment is going to be painful, but in this split second, this split moment, is there pain? Like if I take away the past and I take away the projection of the future, am I experiencing pain? And damn it, the answer was yes.
Right. Well, here's
so I'm just trying to
what I would do.
I'm just trying to figure out
how. What I would do at that point is say, okay, yeah, it's pain. No pretending it ain't pain.
Right.
Then, okay, what is pain? What is pain? It's pain. What is it? And you take away the word pain. You take away the anything, which is just spin doctrine. What is the phenomena itself? And it turns out not to be a single thing. I mean, it's not nothing. It's not a matter of negating it, and it's not a matter of trying to negate it. Even if you try to negate it, nothing gets negated. But what it is that's present is very weird. Pain is not a simple thing. Pain is a very weird, subtle, complex, strange thing, as all direct experiences are. And which doesn't do shit. I mean, your tooth still hurts and it's going to hurt till you see the dentist. I mean, that's the fact of the matter. But in the fact of it, what is pain? What is this? It's present. It sort of takes you to what is experience. I mean, pain is the experience of pain. What is experience? And all of that is intrinsically embodied in that. And it was embodied in that before you asked the question. It's not like it changes anything, but it's being able to be with it. It's being able to sort of play with your focus on it. It's kind of like you're doing when you play with past and future and expectation and all this, and so you're sort of dancing around it. You're circling around this actuality, and it's interesting because it sort of morphs depending on your angle on it, which doesn't do anything, right, necessarily. It's not a matter of solving the pain. It's a matter of that pain is not really pain. What pain really is can't be said, just like what anything really is can't be said.
So if you have that realization that pain is not really pain,
it doesn't fix the pain. But pain turns out not to be fixed. Pain is not the problem. Suffering is the problem. And suffering is the fantasy of this shouldn't be happening to me. Why is this happening to me? I should be the one that's not in pain. Let someone else be in pain. You be in pain. I don't want to be in pain. Right? And that whole that woe is me sort of self-indulgent fantasy is what makes suffering. But pain and suffering are two different things. They're very different things. Pain is painful, no doubt about it. And extreme pain can be extremely painful, as we all know.
And how do you not suffer when you're in pain? They seem to go together. You're in pain. The natural response is, I don't want to be in pain. So you reach for the ibuprofen or whatever.
You don't need to want to. You don't need to want to. You don't need to want to not be in pain, or you don't need to
try and be
not want to be in. Anyway, you don't. It's not about how you're oriented to it. That doesn't matter at all. It's the whole thing is just a weird, crazy chain of events that's happening, will continue to happen, and will lead on to its conclusion and morph into something else, and sooner or later won't be present, like everything is sooner or later won't be present. And that's not a rationalization, that's just a simple fact. And you're with that fact in real time, like you always are. And there's no harm, no foul, in a sense. It's like, okay, I don't like this pain. I wish it wasn't there. I would get rid of it if I could. But given all of that, given that all of that is there, then what? Okay, here I am.
So for you, the presence continues.
Yes.
So that's the distinction. So when you say, what do? I am trying to figure out how to get out of pain. And you are not trying to figure out how to get out of pain.
Well, I may try to figure no. I may put a lot of effort into trying to figure out how to get out of pain.
Right, but you're not wasting as much energy as I am trying to figure out. You stay more logical. All right, I'll take some ibuprofen. I'll call the dentist, and I'm also noticing what this is. Is that it? Like there's a higher awareness.
Well, you can't not notice what it is. You can't get away from it. I mean, let me back up a little bit.
Help.
Yeah, let's back up a little bit. We've been talking about what I'm calling this yoga, which is a sort of an ongoing, more or less ongoing commitment to explore your experience from afresh, or flirt with that, and to whatever degree you do. The interesting phenomena that happens with this, very surprisingly rapidly, is your whole sense of being with your experience sort of morphs. It begins to shift, and your whole sense of where you are in your experience begins to shift. And one will find oneself settling into experiencing on a kind of, I don't know, this is all bullshit, but it's a way of putting it that's not wholly untrue. You sort of settle into the fact of experiencing on a deeper and deeper level. So instead of sort of being you with your experience being buffeted around by it, you're kind of in the deep strata of it. And the being buffeted around is still happening. The superficial stuff doesn't go anywhere, but somehow you're sort of with it from a different sort of a feeling tone of integration. I don't know how to describe it.
No, that makes sense, right? Totally. Yeah,
but,
that makes sense.
So this, what I'm basically laying out here through this sort of flirting with the direct presence of experience and training yourself, it's basically a kind of sensitivity training. You're becoming sensitive to experience itself rather than our usual obsession with the contents of experience, of what's going on and who's doing what and what's in it for me kind of thing. Just sort of, okay, cool, that stuff's all there. We're not denying it. But what is experience itself? And so from time to time, you just flirt with that and feel the fact of experiencing. And just feeling that is strangely and irrationally potent. And just doing that from time to time, to whatever degree you do, will have a tendency to affect a shift in the way it feels like. God knows what it is, but it feels like it affects a kind of a shift in sort of where you're sitting in your experiences. I don't know, it's you can't really say what that is. But it's automatic. It's not like something you need to do or try and do or like make happen. Just the very flirtation with naked experience itself is transformative, and it generates more of itself. The more you're with naked experience, the more you will be with naked experience as naked experience, and the less you will be with it as, abstracted circumstance of this or that's happening. Which doesn't, again, it's subtle because it doesn't negate that. That comes with, but it stops being in that context and assumes a much stranger, more sort of a oceanic quality of a sort of a fullness of a unity kind of thing. It's not, none of this stuff is accurate. It's all sort of poetic.
Couldn't you say that the suffering is the story you tell yourself about the pain?
Very much so. Very much so.
If you don't tell yourself a story, then it's just.
But it's not. It's simply a matter of stopping telling yourself stories or trying to tell stories. It's if you train yourself or accustom yourself to be with your experience more directly as experience, the stories telling will continue because it's the nature of mind to spin off stories, and it's going to do it till you die and probably beyond. But we'll find out about that. So anyway, the stories will continue, but through this sort of sensitization or training process of being with experience directly in whatever way you do, the stories and following the stories and relating to it as if the stories were accurate just becomes less and less relevant. The mind still chatters and it still happens. Less so. I mean, a lot less so. It's a shift in emphasis, a real shift in perspective. Everything that is present for a spiritually ignorant person is exactly present for a spiritually realized person, but the perspective is very different.
You're just noticing it. You're not getting into it.
Yeah, the
story's not. It's just chatter.
In a way, you could say that, but it's not a dismissive kind of a thing. It's different than that. It's just a different perspective.
It's almost like the texture of the pain, quote unquote, is the same as the texture of the narration of the pain, in a sense.
Yeah, but okay. Here's very fundamentally the potent point of it. What seems to be happening becomes less important. You begin to care less and less what your experience looks like in the moment, and you'll be more and more sort of drinking deep of the fact that it is very non-linearly and irrationally. And the way in which that happens is subtle, because it's not like you're sort of negating anything or writing anything off. It's just you're much more interested in sort of in drinking deep of being, even when all the usual shit's happening, and you're much less worried about the shit that's happening without anything actually having changed. Your experience is actually just exactly the same, but you're being with it. You're drinking it from a deeper level, you might say.
In my experience, the pain is less intense when I do that.
Yeah, you could say that. The effect is that. The effect is that.
Suddenly it's not.
Yeah, and the effect is kind of like that, and it's not even that it solves the problem of the pain.
No, but it's different.
It's different. It is different. It is different. You know.
You hear, people that think that or know that they're dying. They're just so amazed that it's all happening, and that's all there is.
Sure.
And that to me feels like love, like really realizing.
Oh, totally. Sure.
It's the feeling of deeply 100% being with that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, love is a kind of an interesting thing. I'm glad you brought that up. Love is this word that is a kind of a potent word that just seems to have a myriad, shock and scatter of connotations and implications. But the actuality of love is the harmony of this being with itself. So, this is always harmonious with itself. No matter what it looks like or what seems to be happening, there's intrinsic and an inalienable harmony where it loves itself, it works with itself, it is with itself. This apparent friction is only apparent. It's always a basic harmony. It's always a basic dance with itself, which is the real love. It's the real inclusiveness. And again, as you point out, like for example, in shifted perspective, like awareness of death brings an awareness of this inclusiveness, or more generally, training yourself, as I'm suggesting, can do the same thing, where you just get a sense of the flow of events is a kind of a fullness, and it's a kind of a lusciousness, and it's a kind of it's a beautiful symphony that is always that, regardless of what it looks like, regardless of what notes are being played, it still is this beautiful symphony. And there's really more and more of a palpable sense of that, which is it's love, it's inclusion, it's harmony, it's dancing with itself, music of the spheres. I mean, all this kind of poetic stuff, and you talk about awareness of death, and that's a really interesting thing to think of. I have news for you. You're gonna die. For real. Everybody is gonna die. I'm gonna die. That's an interesting fact. You can think about that. You don't know when. Maybe you're gonna die tomorrow. You don't know that you are. And even if a doctor told you you're gonna die tomorrow, you still don't know if you're gonna die tomorrow. Because you never know when you're gonna die. But That's a perspective shifter, you know. You're going to die. You know, you don't know when. Interesting. What's that feel like? As opposed to like, oh, woe is me. Oh, no, I'm going to die. Oh, okay, cool. You get a given. Then, okay, you know, all this is going to stop and it's going to shift radically and drastically, right, in an unknown way. Interesting. You just sit with that. It's like, okay, wow, interesting. And in the face of that, what does this feel like? That this is all going to be gone in some very profound, unknown way. What's that feel like? What's it feel like that it is here now and isn't gone? You know, what's that feel like? And so all of this is just ways of being with this, you know, from an unknown perspective. You know, people typically manufacture normalcy. We manufacture a fantasy of what's going on. It's more or less the same thing as what's yesterday. It's going to be more or less the same tomorrow. It's kind of the normal stream of events in my normal life and blah, blah. It's a total fantasy, you know. This is always a precious, unexpected surprise that is here now, completely unpredictably, and it's going to disappear utterly. You know, it is disappearing utterly in real time. You know, you go to sleep and it all disappears utterly. You die, it all disappears utterly. And you know, what's that feel like? You know, it's not like there's any big deal there. There's no conclusions or anything, but it's like, wow, interesting. What's that do to normalcy? You know, what's that do to same old, same old?
So speaking of death, what are your thoughts on death? Is it eternal? What does happen after you die?
And death is exactly the same as this. But having said that, that's a trick answer. Because what this is what it is, but what this is unpredictable what it looks like. This is what it is. This is the same thing that it is, but it looks completely different when you're in deep sleep. It's the same thing that it is, but it looks completely different when you're in heavy-handed general anesthesia and are essentially unconsciousness. But this is still this. This is the same thing when you're dreaming. When you die, this will be this, because it always is this. But having said that, nothing will be gained or lost, but what it's going to look like is completely unknown. But what it's going to look like is always completely unknown. You don't know what the next instant's going to look like. You don't know what it's going to look like when you go to sleep tonight. You don't know what it's going to look like when you start dreaming.
So in your mind or thoughts or beliefs or whatever you want to call it, there's just a thin veil between here, the human body, and minus the human body. Totally.
No.
No.
The human body is nothing. The human body appears and disappears with wild abandon. You know, every time you blink, your body disappears. Every time you go to sleep, your body disappears. But this doesn't go anywhere. This presence doesn't go anywhere. So the body is something that comes and goes within presence.
Right.
But presence is not dependent on the body. On the contrary, the body is dependent on presence. With no presence, the body wouldn't appear. How could it?
So presence exists.
Yes.
Life or death.
Presence is existence.
Absolutely. So based on that, do you feel that it's easily accessible to communicate with that presence that has left their body?
Well, absolutely, because the presence is always communicating with itself and nothing else is ever happening. I mean, this right now, your experience is the presence communicating with itself. When you go to sleep and they're in deep sleep, it's the presence communicating with itself. It can look like anything, but it is always exactly this. It never departs from itself. And I will put money down that when you die, you will find the same thing.
I agree. I put money down too. I totally agree. Yeah.
But even that presence is going to continue in the next instant is basically an empirical observation. The presence is, And there is no next instant, there is no last instant, it's only now. So what's the next instant mean? It just means that now always looks different than itself. And now can seem to have a memory of ways that it claims that it looked formerly. And how does any of that work? The whole thing is like, whoa, I don't know. The entire past is a fantasy that happens in real time. And it sure feels like it happened. But when you begin to try and find it, you can't find the past. All you find is this here now. All you find is ready presence. It's the only actuality.
Thank you.
So the fact, if you will, of mind-body begets I, me, mine. Could you say that?
Sure, it's a train of logic. I mean, it's not a rational train, it's not derived at by thinking of it, but yet it's an implication. Yeah. If you are a partiality, and that partiality is dependent upon other things, that all of a sudden the orientation of that partiality towards these other things becomes relevant because of that dependency. But all that's an if.
Back to the pain idea.
Yeah.
You've had a toothache too?
I have had experiences where if I tell my body to heal, I'm finding that it's doing that.
Sure.
So, and I'm also feeling like it is I know it sounds like I'm creating separation, but it's very receptive to answering me.
Sure. Why not?
But why does it happen sometimes and not all the time?
Who knows? And even when it happens, does it really happen, or is that if it's happening, or is it? I mean, what's happening when it happens? What's happening when it doesn't happen? What's happening when it sort of happened? I mean, the whole thing, it's all bets are off. It's like asking, how do I walk? Well, I don't know. I just do it. I can do it. I couldn't possibly tell you how I do it. I couldn't tell you what's happening when I do it, but I can do it. So if I can heal myself, I mean, the body heals sometimes, right? And sometimes there's a sense of participation in that to various degrees, and sometimes there isn't to various degrees, and like, what's up with any of that? And it's all just a big question mark. But there's no, I would say there's no limit to ways and modes in which there can be an experience of participation with all kinds of functioning. Mm-hmm. And I mean all kinds.
When you were saying that it was making love to itself, maybe that's part of it, why sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Because it seems like if the more I give to it, the more it gives to me.
I think maybe something along those lines, but also it's very nonlinear. There's tides and flows and seasons, and sometimes the tides coming in and sometimes the tides going out, and sometimes the magic works and sometimes it doesn't. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah. Things ebb and flow. Nothing is reliably always a certain way. Sometimes things are popping and sometimes they just aren't. And that whole thing, the very nature of energy systems has a life of its own and has ebbs and flows and sort of tidal patterns of its own. I mean, like you can look at astrological theory and all these kinds of things. I mean, or you can look at your moods. I mean, if you just follow the sort of flavor of your mood over the course of 5 minutes or an hour or a day or a week or something, you just see these amazing, continual flows and fluctuations and jumps and just all of this amazing energy dance that's just ongoing continually. And also all of that is always happening. I mean, that's just looking at it in terms of like say emotion or moods or whatever. But that same dance of energy flows is happening in all energy systems. It's happening in your body. Sometimes your body has more energy, sometimes less energy. Sometimes it's more functional, sometimes it's less functional. And that's just sort of heavy-handed qualification. But we call it the way the energy works is continually morphing on all levels at all times. And so you may be, working with the stream on one occasion, you may be working against the stream on another occasion when you're trying to do the same thing. And on the one hand, it works real well. On the other hand, it doesn't. And so the whole thing is like, what is that? Well, you can't answer that question. It's just this continual instability and flow and dynamism. You know, I mean, the astounding thing is the degree to which you can seem to participate with that in all kinds of ways. And that's very nonlinear too, because exactly what's happening when you do that and all of that is just a complete, it's weird. I mean, it's just weird. How does that happen? How does participation happen? How does intention happen? How does focus of attention happen? How does, what's up with any of it? And, again, it's just, ultimately it gets down to the same question of what is this? Because all of these sub-aspects of this are nothing other than this itself, right? And its nature is weird, its nature is strange, its nature is so, unstable in one sense, and so absolutely constant in another sense. And, just endless weirdness.
Is that why they say there's no birth? Going back to death for a second, no birth. There's really no birth or no death, because what this is our experience will change, but what this is never changes.
Well, in one sense, that certainly applies. In another sense, there's no birth of a particular, we call it a dharma technically, or a particular configuration of affairs, because there's no point where a particular configuration of affairs is actually in effect, and there's no point where it's actually coming into effect, and there's no point where it's actually going out of effect, because what's actually happening is more slippery than that. So everything, all conditions are being born and dying, appearing and disappearing simultaneously. So their appearance is their disappearance, and so it's weirder than that. I mean, we think of time, it's easy to have a simplistic idea of time and the flow of events and circumstances as, well, things come into configuration of being a certain way, and then they are that way for some unspecified duration, and then they deteriorate or morph into something else, whatever, right? But if you look very closely at your experience, first of all, you discover, interestingly, the present moment has no duration. There's absolutely no period of time that anything is a certain way. Everything is becoming a certain way, and then it's not, and then it's changing. And there's no point where it sort of pauses and is a certain way. It's like so it's continually appearing, and the appearing is a disappearing, and there's no time when it's actually here. I mean, this is weird. It's mind-boggling, because ordinarily we have a simple sense, well, circumstances are just here. They're sort of the way they are. And they change, and they're sort of constantly changing. But you may think of that as a kind of a meandering thing, where the present actually has some duration. But you can't actually find the present moment. And there's zero duration that any condition actually is that way. It's always sort of becoming that way and disappearing without any actual being in the middle. So, I mean, it's just infinitely slippery. And it's not literally like that either, but you can't say what it's like. It's intrinsically transcendental. And this isn't theoretical. Look very closely at your experience, and you will discover this astounding slipperiness of conditions. Like if this is an experiment you can play that's very, very simple to do. You can watch a second hand of a clock and pick a number, like say 12, and the second hand's approaching. It's moving to 12, it's moving to 12, it's moving to 12, it's moving past 12. There's no time, it doesn't like it is ever actually at 12 for any instant. It's moving towards 12, and the second it hits 12, it's moving away from 12. It's never actually at 12. We think of it as that way, but it's actually passing it. And this is physically true too. If you took a picture of the second hand of the clock, the picture would always be blurry because it's moving, right? You know about panning. I don't know if you know photography at all. Panning is an interesting phenomenon. Like say you take a picture of a car that's driving past you, a race car or something. If you just held the camera like this and click, no matter how fast the shutter speed is, the car is going to be blurred and the background is going to be clear, right? But suppose you track the car like this and click, the car is going to be sharp and the background is going to be blurry. So when you're in a relatively moving frame of reference where one portion of it is moving apparently relative to another portion, like the hands of a clock or a car driving by, no matter how fast you take a picture, one portion is going to be blurred. Okay? If you take a picture of a second hand moving past 12, it will always be blurred. Now, the blurring might be infinitesimal. You might say, well, gosh, I get the shutter speed fast enough, it's virtually not blurred. And yet, in actuality, it's blurred. It's still moving. It's still moving a finite amount of time because it never stops moving. And never stops moving means it's there, it's there, it's there, it's there, it's going, it's going, it's going, it's going. Never is here. I mean, and this sounds like mind games. It sounds like, well, these are fun thought experiments. But look at your experience. I mean, this is some really weird shit.
Could you speak about fear in relation to what she said? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. What role does fear play in that or in general?
I'm not sure about in that. Fear is always reacting to an abstraction. Always. Fear is always a reaction to a way that the imagination holds things to be.
So in this case, if she were less fearful, would that impact her success rate of healing versus who knows?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, it's not necessarily related or not, right?
Just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, who knows?
This whole healing thing is kind of interesting in the context of
Yeah.
anything in the past is really just a thought in the present. So if I truly believe my thought in the present was yesterday I was in hospice and near death, I'm a miracle of healing.
Well,
you know,
healing,
it's almost like arbitrary because the past is kind of arbitrary.
All description of process is always hypothetical.
Yeah.
Cause and effect is a theory.
Yeah.
It really is a theory. You know, like I took this, you know, I was feeling crappy, and so I took this medication, and now I'm feeling better. Yeah. So the theory is, and so that's because I took the medicine, or not. You happen to take the medicine, you happen to feel crappy, you happen to feel better, and is that an inclusive listing of all the factors involved? You know, really? It's just you can't know why anything happens linearly on the basis of anything else that seems to be happening. We have, you know, I mean, it's very commonplace that humans have these theories. You know, this happened, and so that caused that to happen. But these theories are always very simplistic because they leave out so much actual event that may or may not be participating in the chain of events.
That whole investment in that causality is what holds us together, right?
Well, in a way, you could say that. I mean, that whole abstraction of creating a linear narrative in the face of the actuality of no linearity and no narrative creates the illusion of a you and the illusion of a together when there actually is no you and no together. There's no together, there's no untogether. There's just this. Is this together? I don't know. Is it untogether? I don't know. It's too weird to tell. You can't resolve it.
If in actuality, it's all happening in your, for as far as you can know, it's happening in your awareness of experience.
Sure.
Right now.
Yeah.
How can you, in the now, know about a future?
Well, you can't definitively, can you? You can't know what's going to happen 1 minute from now or 1 second from now, let alone tomorrow.
But what if you do?
Huh?
But what if you do?
If you do, you do.
And then, so how can that be if there's no?
How can anything be? Since nothing is explainable or describable in terms of how it happens, there's no reason to be surprised that something particular thing can happen. I mean, suppose a miracle happened. Suppose I threw my iPhone in the air and it stayed there, sat there. Okay. It's like, how could that happen? I don't know. You know, suppose I threw it up and it fell. How could that happen? I don't know. You know, it's just all of this predictability is on the basis of theory, and the actuality is always surprising. Even if I threw my iPhone in the air and it fell, which would be expected, the exact throwing and the exact trajectory and the exact falling and exactly what it looked like and exactly what you saw as it happened is totally unpredictable. You know, so the more generally you describe things, the more accurately they seem to work out that way. I can say tomorrow the sun's going to rise, and it's probably pretty safe to say that's true. Okay, we'll find out, right? But that's a very general statement. That if I say at exactly the moment of sunrise, my experience is going to look exactly like this. You know, how could that happen? I don't know exactly what my experience is going to look like. And the world, your experience is not made of generalities, it's made of specifics. Okay? Like you can say generalities, oh, the sun's up now, or the sun's setting now, or oh, it's afternoon, or oh, it's, Wednesday, or oh, this is, But all of those generalities, they may be true as far as they go, but the details of your experience aren't made of these generalities. They're made of exactly what light you happen to be seeing in the moment, exactly what sounds you happen to be hearing, exactly what sensations you happen to be feeling. And those are not included in the generalities, right? Or let's say generalities doesn't address that level of actuality. So all these abstractions, again, are sort of oversimplifications. And the more you oversimplify, the truer or less true it can seem to be. Whereas the more you get down to the specifics of what's actually present, the weirder it gets and the less you can say about what's happening.
And it's more in the question of, I think, too, what Chris is asking too. Like, what about a specific kind of more, what would be termed a clairvoyant kind of someone,
Suppose that
before the Titanic.
Sure, suppose that happens.
Saw that specificity.
Suppose I feel like, God, the phone's about to ring and it's going to be so and so, and the phone rings and it's so and so. So if that happens, what? All you can say is, yeah, that happened.
Right.
You can claim that. You can claim that happened, even if that happens, you can't say what happened. And you certainly can't say why it happened anymore. You can say why anything happened.
Even if it happened 10 times in a row, it's the same. There's still no causal explanation or whatever. It's all.
Yeah. See, if things happen, all that proves is that they seem to happen in your experience. That doesn't mean anything. There's no process. All of that's just theoretical. I wish I could do miracles for you guys, or more, let's say more explicit miracles than I do. My we call him spiritual teacher, could make things move without touching them, and it's a wonderful thing to see that. Not because it's particularly important, but because it's really interesting. It's really interesting. About like, wow, this is happening, and what's happening? When's this happening? How's this happening? I don't know. But then, okay, but here I'm sitting in a chair. What's happening when that's happening? I don't know. Is that really any more or less mysterious than this? And the answer is exactly the same. Weird shit happens. And the weird shit may be weird shit that we're categorizing as normal, or maybe weird shit that we're categorizing as weird. But the categorization, it's all the same. It's all just strange phenomena appearing mysteriously. No one knows how anything. I mean, why does light appear? Why does gravity work? Why does thought appear? Why does life happening? These are all mysteries. Who knows? It is as it is, and what does why or how have to do with anything other than just bullshitting, other than spin doctrine?
Almost like everything is spontaneous magic, and it's like that's just more spontaneous magic.
Exactly.
So
everything is essentially miraculous. That this exists at all is essentially big question mark, i.e. miracle. Call it whatever you call it, will of God, or call it, the Big Bang, or call it whatever, but it's basically just a sophisticated way of describing I don't have a clue. and what is happening when anything happens, and how it happens, and why it happens, is always exactly the same. I don't have a clue. So, the word miracle is a kind of a nice round word, which pretty inclusively indicates that. So just say, well, everything happens as a miracle, I drop my phone, it falls, it's a miracle. I throw my phone up and it stays there, it's a miracle. And the one isn't any more or less of a miracle than the other. It's just weird shit happening, weird shit appearing to happen, and undescribably. I think it's been a long day, and I think we've been through a lot of stuff, and I'm very pleased with some of the places we've gone with this. So I hope that it's been at least interesting for you.
Yeah.
I will be here tomorrow at 10:30, and you're welcome